Fantasy football season, we're right in the middle of. Your financial fantasy team is vitally important. Being able to have someone who can help out with wealth management, your risk, your tax, cash flow, estate planning, philanthropy.
Have the right things in place to protect from these unforeseen events.
I think you need to have an estate planning attorney.
Like you said, it's everything else that can help a client in a financial way and impact their life.
Welcome to another edition of Wealth Strategies Unleashed. I'm Robert Gilliland.
And I'm Karen Hyder.
We're with Concenture Wealth Management here in Houston. Hey, Karen, we are smack dab in the middle of fantasy football.
Mm-hmm. Have you made your team yet?
Yeah, I've just been too busy. I used to do it. It was kind of successful, but
you had a whole family draft in the past.
Yeah, well, that's more for college. The college bowl season, and then also we do a draft for obviously March Madness. Maybe we'll do something around that. But it got me to kind of thinking as we kind of go through. Oh, hold on, before we start,
you almost missed the best part of these.
Yeah, as has become our tradition, your dad jokes.
Oh yeah, are you ready for this one this week?
Boom, boom, boom. Dad jokes by Karen Hyder.
I feel like we need to call it Karen's Corner or Karen's Comedy Hour or something. We can still work on that to come in the future.
All right.
All right, for this week's joke, are you ready?
I hope.
Okay. What do you call a mouse that swears?
I have no idea.
A cursor.
That one took a second. I'm thinking mousetrap, cheese, all that stuff. Okay.
I thought you were going to get that one. Wow.
The cursor. Okay.
So good I sidetracked you, huh?
Yeah, that got me completely off. Let's get back to fantasy football. But it started to get me thinking about with fantasy football because all my kids, and I've got a few buddies that play fantasy football, and it seems like that seems to be the talk a lot, especially on Saturdays and Sundays and Mondays, right? People need to have a fantasy financial team, right? And so let's kind of talk about what if you were to go to build a fantasy financial team, what would that look like?
I think there's a couple key players that everybody needs on their financial team. And I think before we even dig into that, I think I want you to walk our listeners through. We've kind of developed this pillar concept that we show our clients and kind of how we envision the financial team being made up. Why don't you walk us through that philosophy first, and then I think we can dig into what each of the members of that fantasy team should be in their roles.
Hold on. I'm the one asking the questions here.
Turned it right back on you.
So, when you go through, you think about it, right? There are really, you go through and can list off every single thing that a financial advisor or a wealth management team helping individuals and families that they should have the ability to do. Because in the old days, it was a stockbroker. Well, that's completely changed. No one's interested in having a stockbroker. They want someone to act as their fiduciary and their financial quarterback.
Yeah.
Right? So what is that? What are the pillars that they need to kind of be aware of? Well, one of them clearly is, and this seems pretty basic, wealth management, right? Stocks, bonds, cash, how do you have that? But then you also need to have risk management. Are you taking too much risk, not enough risk? That could also be insurance. Are your liabilities covered, right? From there, you got to think about tax planning, making sure that you're doing the right things when it comes to managing your after-tax returns. You also need to have someone who can help out with cash flow and the different pieces that are inside of cash flow, and make sure you're being using your capital in the most efficient way. Then you have estate planning. That one's kind of without. We could go on for forever about that. Philanthropy. There are people who are interested in being charitable, and then I think I would also, which we call value added. You need to have someone that can help you out, or at least the pillar. Someone that is the role is to be able to help people with non-investment related things like, do I lease or buy a car? Those kind of things.
Well, I think that's where the quarterback concept comes into play too. That seventh pillar is the advisor acting as kind of the connector. So it's helping advise on a bigger picture strategy for things, but then for those instances or scenarios where an additional person is needed and that service is not performed by the advisor, then they connect the outside person to the client to get that need met, such as if you're buying a house. Obviously, a lot of advisors do not do mortgages, so the advisor can then connect a mortgage lender with the client and have that happen.
Right. Let's actually walk through each one of these. And what would you be looking for someone to be on your financial team, right? So let's start off with wealth management. What do you think kind of is a key place? What are some things that person needs to be good at?
Are we talking about here in terms of an advisor? What kind of things?
Right. Well, the member of the financial team. Now, the quarterback can have other roles, right? But wealth management being one of those pillars, something that you need on your financial fantasy team. What does wealth management entail? What should someone who fills that role have the ability to be able to do?
Yep. So this should be your financial advisor who, in the independent world, covers a lot of different things. So it's the person that's helping with financial planning. It's helping with your investment plan overall, making sure that your allocation is set up correctly between stocks, bonds, cash, alternative investments, things like that. It is the person that is helping manage risk, although I think that's going to go into another pillar in just a second. Tell me more of what you elaborate on some of that for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that wealth management encompasses exactly what you're talking about, right? That is building the plan, allocating the assets, tracking progress on that plan. That's what wealth management is. That's kind of overwhelming, and quite frankly, that doesn't matter what stage you're in life. Everyone has a little bit of an interest. Am I on track or not? Do I need to make adjustments here or not? So that
I think you made a great point there. I think so many times it's often forgotten, that tracking and monitoring stage. I think the first part of it, like you said, is the easy. Everyone knows to do that. It's so important and critical to continue to track and monitor where you are according to your plan. That was a great point.
Yeah, and I think that's the wealth management team member. The next is going to be the tax planning, right? And I'm sorry. Yes, let's talk about tax planning next. Tax planning is not necessarily just the CPA. It's really interesting. A lot of times we sit down with clients and they'll say, well, what can I do to reduce my taxes? Well, unfortunately, in 1986, the ability to be able to go to do a whole bunch of setting up of different things, that's kind of changed. And most people don't have... There's not a lot of deductions that they're leaving on the table.
Yeah.
And so that tax planning role with regard to this financial team needs to be a CPA or someone to prepare the taxes. That's that piece. They need to be knowledgeable, and they need to be able to ensure that you are not paying one penny more than what you have to.
Yep.
Right? On the tax planning side, from what also needs to happen is that you need to work with someone that is that can go in and evaluate. Is there a way in the management of taxable assets to capture losses and offset gains so you're not paying taxes? I mean, the reality is like if you have what's called an open-ended mutual fund, right? That's a mutual fund that most people are historically familiar with. You have no control over the tax implications. And studies have gone in and shown that by effectively managing taxable assets, you can add a net after-tax return greater than 1%. Right?
That makes such a difference.
And over time, that 1.5%, 2%, depending on how it's managed, can be huge. The other thing that tax planning needs to do is that as people are going through and looking at retirement, is try to forecast out what the tax burden is going to be. So let's assume that someone has significant assets or has assets that are taxable, right? That could be a brokerage type of an account. But they've got significant assets, which a lot of people do inside of their retirement plan. When they end up hitting, now it's either 73 or 75, depending on their age, their required minimum distribution, they may actually end up going into a higher tax bracket. So there's some planning that can happen, whether that is doing a Roth conversion, whether that is doing taking distributions earlier to make sure you're capturing that money and building more money up. So
I think that's where it's a good dance between the advisor and the CPA working in tandem on that, because The advisor is the one giving these strategies and talking it through, but it really makes sense to talk with the CPA as well and make sure that we are maximizing the tax bracket that client is in and fully utilizing those areas without bumping somebody into another tax bracket in some of those strategies.
Oh, 100%. Let's talk about risk management, that pillar. What's your thoughts on what that person on our financial fantasy team needs to be aware of or know about?
From a risk standpoint, are we talking about here risks in life outside the portfolio, or are we talking, which way are you talking?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to take one. I think you're going to take the other side of it. So from a risk standpoint, one of the ways I view that pillar is from an insurance standpoint, making sure that you are protected, you and your family, between whether it's car, auto liability type insurance, life insurance, all facets to make sure that if something were to happen, the family is protected, that you have the right things in place to protect from these unforeseen events.
That's huge, right? So that could include risk of long-term care, needing assisted living. That could include a risk of a significant income earner losing their something tragic happen.
Yep.
Right? But then there's also the portfolio management, right? Because a lot of people, what's interesting is that you go through and you build wealth. A lot of times you will build wealth through concentration, right? So think about the Disney family, right? Think about the Fords. They concentrated in owning that company, right? Business owners concentrating on what they are. But the thing is that let's say you go and you have an investment, a stock, whatever, and it doubles, triples, or even goes up even more, right? The hardest thing to do is to sell that.
Well, especially when that's what you know best, and that is what has built your wealth over time. It's an emotional attachment. It's hard to sell it.
Well, yeah. What you have to do with regard to risk is make sure that you're comfortable if it were to drop, is your standard of living going to be okay? If the answer is, yeah, I like having a portfolio that's all stocks or a significant amount of stocks or a significant amount of concentration and I'm comfortable with that, hey, great. No harm, no foul. You're good with it. That's fine. But so if you're comfortable, then the risk management in that. But you do have to be keenly aware. Now, one thing that a lot of people will say, especially as they move closer to retirement, they'll say, well, I'm getting older. I need to take less risk. That's not necessarily the case either.
Well, especially not when we look at retirement being 30, 35 years nowadays. It's so much longer than what it was 50 years ago for somebody retiring. You have to be able to have assets that sustain a whole lot longer period of time. And just viewing things as going a lot more conservative at a big life event like retirement, not always the best scenario or best viewpoint to take.
Which, perfect segue, because that leads us into cash flow, right? Which I would argue when it comes specifically to retirement planning, but I don't necessarily think it's just about retirement planning. It could be college planning. It could be planning for purchase of a second home or a new home. Cash flow and managing of cash flow is vitally important and can make the big difference. Talk a little bit about how you kind of go through and view that pillar of cash flow and what that exactly means or should mean to somebody.
I think I have a couple different things. For a younger investor, I think we hear it quite often, someone that has multiple goals that they're planning for and they're not just sure how to allocate the savings. So they maybe want to buy a home in the next couple of years, but they also need to be saving for college for their little one. And retirement, though it's way far out in the future, that's something they need to plan for too. We get questions a lot of, how should I be saving for all of these goals in tandem? So working with somebody that can help manage how to split up your savings effectively to reach all those different goals. I think the other part of it is for some of our older clients and clients that we work with that are gearing up either towards retirement or now retired, setting up a cash flow strategy so that we have buckets of monies that are available for periods of time. That way their cash flow is available and not subject to market risk, while the rest of the assets can be working and have more of a long-term time horizon and can take more risk. The other part I would add to this pillar before you kind of dig into some of these, I think nowadays with the evolution of technology the way it is a lot easier to take advantage of technology in the cash flow realm, meaning there are so many apps out there nowadays that can help people figure out from a budgeting standpoint. I know that is a lot of people's least favorite word, budgeting, but it is so important to understand where your monies are going, whether you're somebody in your working years or somebody in your retirement years. Knowing where your funds are going on a monthly and yearly basis can really keep a handle on your funds and make sure you're on track toward your goals. So leveraging technology to help your cash flow and understanding what cash you have available, but also from a budget standpoint where it's going, is also part of that pillar.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think without regard to what stage you are in life, having an effective management plan when it comes to cash flow really can be the determining factor between success and failure, especially when you're planning and thinking about retirement.
Yes.
And I just think back to some real life examples that actually gone through and lived through, right? Mm-hmm. You go back and you think about the tech bubble and when that crashed. I think you were probably still in high school at that time.
I was.
But luckily, I was able to experience the tech bubble popping, right? And what I realized there is that our clients who were able to make it when the market dropped 40, 50, 60%, who had cash flow to maintain their standard of living and not be forced to liquidate investments, ended up coming out much, much better. Back up to one that's very still has scars on people, and that is the Great Recession, right? The financial bubble that popped. And this is the reason why we call it the dynamic age approach, which maybe we should talk about that at some other time, because what that's proven, and as we go through and do that, is and we set that up for people, is it gives them peace of mind about cash flow. If in 2007 you thought that the market was going to continue to go and go up, by the time you got to 2010, if you didn't, and you needed money between 08, 09, even 10, you were having to sell investments in all likelihood at a lower cost. If you effectively manage your cash flow and can project out cash flow, then what ends up happening is that you have time. Now, that doesn't mean that I own company ABC, and company ABC's got a fouled up process, or there's something that's messed up fundamentally with them, right? And they're going out of business or not going to be around anymore, or, which I guess is one and the same, or going to have a long road. That doesn't mean that you continue to own company ABC, but it means you continue to own the asset class.
Yep.
Effectively managing cash flow and effectively projecting cash flow makes the difference between success and failure in retirement. And I would argue 98% of the time.
100%. Yeah, absolutely agree.
You're going to say 100%
I started
to 98%?
to, yes, and I realized that, nope, that counteracted that. You know, something else you said that I think is really important to hit on. You talked about the emotional scars of somebody that lived through the tech bubble at the turn of the century, somebody that is very keenly aware of the Great Recession in 07, 08, 09. I think having a strategy to manage your cash flow and to get through and still be successful in those big life events helps with the emotional scars, because everyone feels the emotional toll it takes when we have those big, what we call black swan events. And let's face it, those are not done. We're going to see more of those in the future, most likely in our lifetime. So having a plan in place for your cash flow can help not only be successful in your financial plan, but also help control the emotions and the ability to survive that and still be an investor and still maintain your level of success.
The thing that's interesting is you use black swan event. Everyone wants to know, how do I plan for that black swan event? By definition, you cannot plan for a black swan event.
Yep.
It's just something that happens. That's why cash flow becomes so important. The next pillar, estate planning. What are some things that people, what does that team member need to do, and who is that team member?
Yep, so that's an attorney, and I feel like this pillar covers two facets of the attorney. So one is the estate side, meaning planning for what happens to your assets when you're no longer around. So I know that there's usually 4 key things we tell clients they need to have in place when they're thinking through their estate planning. Talk about those 4 things for us.
Well, the thing that I think that one of them is an optional because it's really a personal choice. But number one, people need to have a will.
Yep.
Depending on their situation, they may or may not need to have a living trust or a revocable trust. I have opinions on that. I defer to attorneys all the time. But having a will, even if you do have a revocable or what's called a living trust, you need to have a will. Next thing you need to have is a durable power of attorney. If something happens and you become incapacitated, financial matters can still be taken care of. The other is a healthcare power of attorney. That is, someone can make decisions for you. Yes, we want to do surgery, or no, we don't want to do surgery, or whatever.
And
right?
clarify, is that the person that can say whether to pull the plug or not, for lack of a better term?
No, that is the next optional
Okay.
one, which is really a matter, that's a directive to physicians,
Gotcha.
right? Without regard to what people's opinions are on that, that is really a personal choice. But those first 3 documents are what you need to have. You need to have a will, you need to have a durable power of attorney, you need to have durable power of attorney, and you need to have a healthcare power of attorney, directive to physicians. Now, with regard to estate planning, people say, well, I don't have a big enough estate to do estate planning. You still need to have a will.
Yeah.
The other thing that you need to do is you need to review your beneficiary designations, life insurance, annuities, 401ks, IRAs. Make sure that that's how and what you want to have happen. Those types of things, there are things that a wealth manager or the quarterback, we do with clients, right, is that we walk through and say, okay, do we have this taxable account titled properly so it flows the way that your estate plan wants it to flow? Are your beneficiaries set up properly so it flows the way you want it to flow? I think with estate planning included in that could then turn around to be, if you have an estate tax liability, what are the strategies that you can go through to apply to that, right? And leading us into the next pillar, really.
Actually, go back on that one for a second. So as part of that attorney office, we often think of it as mainly estate planning, but there are other situations for clients where they might need to rely on an attorney. Can you think of some of those? Oh, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, you did. Where people would need to, with regard to their estate planning?
Not necessarily estate planning, but I view estate planning in that pillar as the attorney in their life that's helping them with different life situations.
So I think that it's vitally important that if you are going through a marriage later in life or a second marriage, I think that it's vitally important to have real serious adult conversations and utilize an attorney for making sure that both parties are protected.
Exactly.
So that would be a prenuptial agreement. So that's a family attorney that can go through and do that. I think that with regard to estate planning in this pillar, I think it's vitally important not just to have your business attorney or your next door neighbor who's a corporate attorney or someone who's a tax attorney draft your will. I think you need to have an estate planning attorney draft your will.
Fully agree.
And because they're specialized in it and that's what they do. And so I would strongly encourage that inside of there. And one of the things as you're going through and developing, if you're not going to derail me here, let's hope, is that inside of that estate plan, you can also include philanthropy, right? And so as you go through and you think about your quarterback needs to be aware of what are some strategies if you do have philanthropic, that's a difficult word for me to say, philanthropic ambitions, right? But what's something that someone can do that's not, they want to be around to do it, that they want to make? What are some things people can think about?
There's a couple different strategies, and that's where the advisor really comes into play to determine which of these makes sense for somebody. But for someone who is over the age of 70 and a half, there's things like taking qualified charitable distributions or QCDs, basically using funds that would be RMD funds and going straight to a charity. So you are reducing what your required minimum distribution would be while also satisfying your goal to give money to a charity. So that's one option you can look at. There are instances where it makes sense to look at a donor-advised fund for clients. That's a way to be able to continue to give your funds to charities of your choice.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, so one thing that's important is people understand what donor-advised funds are.
Go through that with us.
I have a big, let's assume that I have a big windfall. Could be a bonus, could be a sale of property or something like that, and I've got a lot of money. So therefore, my current taxes are going to jump up.
Yep.
One thing that you can do is you can take a portion or all, if you wanted to, that money and put it in what's called a donor advised fund. Now that could be invested, right? And that donor advised fund, let's say I put $100,000 into the donor advised fund, I would get a tax deduction of $100,000 this year. I then could take the next several years and use that $100,000 to do my donations. Okay? And so a donor advised fund is a way to, now, here's the other thing. Let's assume I was going to give $25,000 a year to whatever charity, right? Or groups of charities.
Yeah.
If I do $25,000 this year, I get that deduction this year. If I do $25,000 next year, I get that deduction, so on and so forth. So that $100,000 in theory would be used up over the next 4 years. I put the $100,000 in here. I get that full $100,000, but when I give my 25 next year, I don't get another deduction on it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to think through kind of that on philanthropy. But you can go through and do a lot of things. You can also set up family foundations. You can, which is very, very complex, and there's a lot of things that you can go and do kind of inside there. A lot of times, also, we'll work with clients if they want to pay back their alma mater. And
I was about to say that one.
Right?
We've had a lot of those situations lately.
And that's very easy to do. Where that quarterback comes in, where we've worked with our clients, is one, making sure the cost of setting that up with that whatever organization is not too expensive. Also making sure that withdrawal rates, if our goal is to make this go off into perpetuity, making sure those withdrawal rates are not too much.
Yep.
Right?
Well, making sure that the client's goals are not going to derail their financial success over time are very important.
Right. So that's the next. Now the last pillar, which I think there's a ton that we call it the value added service pillar. So what does this teammate on our financial fantasy team need to be aware of, or what would you need this value add person?
I think there's a lot of specific situations I can think of, but the best way to categorize this category is the other category, all things financial that a client comes to us and says, I'm just not sure about XYZ.
Like
this
what?
is wanting to buy a car. How many times have we heard in the last year somebody saying, man, my car's breaking down. I've had it for 10 years. It's time for a new one. Now what? Do I lease a car? Do I buy a car? Do I get used versus new? What should I be thinking about? My lease is about to come due. Should I buy the car now, or should I turn around and buy something else or get a new lease? This is where the financial quarterback steps in, helps evaluate the plan, the cash flow, where things are, and helps make the best decision for the client about how to actually get that next car. So that's one.
Yeah. When I think about this value added, it's actually kind of funny because we've had conversations with clients about, hey, I want to go on vacation and I want to go to this spot. What do you know? I want to buy a new computer. What should I be looking at? All these different, that value-added service needs to be someone who's kind of well-rounded and kind of can almost act as kind of a concierge. Is it concierge or concierge? You actually say the G. I thought.
Oh my goodness, I think you do. Have I been saying it wrong all along?
Oh, I have no idea. I went to school in East Texas. So
Harvard of the Piney Woods, you mean?
That's right. So that it almost act as kind of that concierge, whatever you want to call it, kind of thing that can kind of go through to help inside of that. The design of this is not to say, yeah, you should go see this movie. The design of this is how do you go through to things that you have questions on, someone who has resources to help you get answers. What credit card should I use? How do I go to evaluate this credit card? That kind of thing right there. So,
even another one that I feel like is key is a lot of clients will come to us and say, my child's about to graduate college and I really want to make sure that we're establishing their credit the correct way. Now what credit card, or how should I be establishing credit for them? Or even having conversations with their children talking about financial literacy and what is a credit card in general and how to build credit. So it's, like you said, it's everything else that can help a client in a financial way and impact their lives.
That's right. Fantasy football season, we're right in the middle of it. And that is huge, right? It's a big, big business, actually. Your financial fantasy team is vitally important to your success. Being able to have someone who can help out with wealth management and everything that's involved in there, your risk, your tax, cash flow, estate planning, philanthropy, and then as an added benefit, that concierge or concierge, however you want to call it, type of person that's inside there. It's very important. That quarterback has to have a good relationship with you. You have to like, know, and trust them.
Yep.
Right? And they have to, I would argue, be a fiduciary, have your best interests as a requirement.
Well, and as part of that, as being a fiduciary, you expect them to work well with your fantasy team. So they work well with your accountant, your estate planning attorney, every pillar in there that we've just gone through. And they are having conversations that have your best interests at all times, and they work effectively for your interests.
As we kind of wrap up, the one thing that just kind of occurred to me as you're in there is thinking about that is that, you know what? I think there may be some people who go and listen to this that might think, I don't have enough money for all that. Mm-hmm. That's something that someone with $100 million needs. Mm-hmm. That's not true.
Not at all.
One thing that we know is that no matter how much money you have, that's your money, and that's vitally important. You may not need as much focus from that tax planning teammate, if you will, as you do from the wealth management or cash flow. You may not be at a stage in life where financial philanthropic giving is as important to you. But you still need someone to be aware to kind of help you as you kind of go through. So I think the reality is that having that financial fantasy team is vital to people's success, and having those resources to go through to help them.
Absolutely.
Awesome. We covered a lot of ground there.
We did.
All right. Well, I just hope the next time I play fantasy football, I win. Thanks for the time, and thanks for going through this. And thank you to everyone for tuning in this week. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
The information contained herein is intended to be used for educational purposes only and is not exhaustive. Diversification and/or any strategy that may be discussed does not guarantee against investable losses, but are intended to help manage risk and return. If applicable, historical discussions and/or opinions are not predictive of future events. The content is presented in good faith and has been drawn from sources believed to be reliable. The content is not intended to be legal, tax, or financial advice. Please consult a legal, tax, or financial professional for information specific to your individual situation.
This work is powered by Concenture Wealth Management, registered representative of Sanctuary Securities, Inc., an investment advisor of Sanctuary Advisors, LLC. Securities offered through Sanctuary Securities, Inc., member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through Sanctuary Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. Concenture Wealth Management is a DBA of Sanctuary Securities, Inc. and Sanctuary Advisors, LLC.